2017 marked an important cinematic milestone. The first time Netflix movies played at the Cannes Film Festival. First, and it would turn out last time. The Cannes crowds actually booed when the Netflix logo appeared on screen.
Smithies, are they booing me?
No, they're saying...
Are you saying boo or...
With much of that heat reportedly stemming from Netflix's bypassing of theatrical exhibition. Sure, Netflix will sometimes put out their prestige movies in limited theatrical release to qualify for Oscars, but extremely limited, bordering on bare minimum before the films land on the real exhibition home, streaming on Netflix. And that's the movies lucky enough to make it to theaters at all. Most go straight to streaming. The next year, festival director Thierry Frémaux imposed a ban on streaming films playing in competition at Cannes, a ban that has been upheld since. Netflix has acquired the distribution rights to some films after they've played the festival, but none of their originals have been screened at Cannes since 2017. The ban was not without controversy. In 2021, in the midst of a global pandemic that was devastating movie theaters around the world, Frémaux was again pressed on the ban. Surely by this point, Netflix had demonstrated their ability to make great movies worthy of competing against the best films from around the world at the world's most prestigious film festival. Frémaux responded with a simple question. What directors have been discovered by the streamers? And nobody could answer him. Netflix had certainly invested considerable resources into big-name directors in their quest for prestige and Oscar gold, but their platform had thus far failed to nurture or develop any new cinematic voices. 5 years and hundreds of Netflix originals later, and Frémaux's question has not become any easier to answer. The streamer's MO has remained either investment in already established name filmmakers, which has admittedly resulted in some very good movies, or genre entertainments made by anonymous craftsmen, which has resulted in some...
Just don't end up grinding coochies with my brother, or I'll literally never talk to you again.
Well, we'll get there. But let's try to take this question seriously. At this point, Netflix has produced something like 1,000 movies. Surely some new filmmakers have slipped through, right? My first instinct was Mike Flanagan, whose film Hush debuted on Netflix back in 2016, and he's continued to work with the streamer on higher profile projects as his status in the industry has grown. Should be a cut and dry case of Netflix discovering and nurturing a new director, right? But it's not so simple. For one, Hush isn't technically a Netflix original. Netflix acquired the distribution rights ahead of the film's premiere at the South by Southwest Film Festival, but it was actually produced by Intrepid and Blumhouse. This is in fact a common occurrence. A lot of the quote-unquote Netflix movies are actually movies that Netflix picks up the distribution rights to after they've already been made, and not ones they make themselves. Moreover, Hush wasn't Flanagan's first or even second feature film. He'd already directed the crowd-funded Absentia in 2011 and the modest horror hit Oculus in 2013, the latter of which was produced in part by WWE Studios. Meaning the guys who made this...
What's that smell?
did more to discover Mike Flanagan than the guys who made Midnight Mass or The Haunting of Hill House. Looking for full-on first features, we still have some contenders. 2021 saw two major directorial debuts occur through Netflix with Rebecca Hall's Passing and Maggie Gyllenhaal's The Lost Daughter, two thoughtful adult dramas with a clear vision behind the camera. Both films were also very well received, and while Hall has yet to follow up her debut, Gyllenhaal has just helmed a big-budget Frankenstein adaptation for Warner Brothers. I'm recording before the film has opened, so I obviously don't know if the film is any good or if it'll be successful. Hi, Daniel from the future here, just to say that The Bride has since released, and while I haven't seen it yet, it's open to pretty appalling reviews in box office, which would seem to put a damper on Maggie Gyllenhaal as any kind of directorial discovery, but you know what? I still think it looks like an interesting and audacious movie, and I'm still looking forward to seeing it. I still hope Maggie Gyllenhaal has the juice as a director. Okay, back to the video. but it is a major project, which shows a new director rising through the ranks. A Netflix discovery? Well, it should be noted that, like Hush, Passing and The Lost Daughter were films Netflix picked up on the festival circuit rather than Netflix productions. There's also the elephant in the room that Rebecca Hall and Maggie Gyllenhaal were already famous actresses flushed with Hollywood connections well before they came to Netflix. They were unproven as directors, sure, but it's still inaccurate to say Netflix discovered them. Quite the contrary, they fit well within Netflix's MO of investing in the already established. So we need a full-blown Netflix original, a movie conceived in part by the streamer and not just released by them. What about To All the Boys I've Loved Before? This was a rarity, a Netflix original from an unestablished filmmaker that managed to break containment and find a wide audience, remaining popular for months and even years after its streaming debut, and even spawning 2 sequels. Susan Johnson had directed an indie dramedy prior, but given its obscurity and the vastly wider viewership of To All the Boys, I think it's fair to say that Netflix discovered Johnson, or at the very least, that Netflix massively elevated her career. Or it would be fair to make those claims if Johnson hadn't been replaced as director on the film's 2 sequels by Michael Filminari, the first film's cinematographer, while Johnson hasn't directed anything since. That was almost 10 years ago. Johnson seemed very eager to tackle the sequels in interviews, and is still credited as an executive producer on films 2 and 3, so clearly something happened here, even if it's unclear what. Regardless, the lack of any follow-through makes it difficult to cite Johnson as a director Netflix discovered. Back to the old drawing board. We're looking for directors with little to no prior feature credits breaking through with a Netflix original that also had some sort of follow-up after their Netflix debut. And I did find some names. First, Sam Hargrave, who made his debut feature Extraction with Netflix in 2020, and a direct sequel again for the streamer in 2023. And I would not call these great movies exactly. The plots are threadbare, the hero is a brooding sack of vacancy, the villains are nondescript meanies who prove instantly forgettable. But these are action movies, and the action scenes show a lot of skill. Hargrave favors these elaborate wonders in his action that, beyond showing off his technical prowess, also convey the relentless dangers, as our characters constantly move out of one frying pan and into another fire. Hargrave also punctuates these elongated set pieces with pointed moments of violence, and his scenes achieve a clarity in their bombast, even creating nail-biting suspense amidst the spectacle. The 2 films also chart Hargrave's growing talents. The action in the first Extraction is pretty good, but exceptional in Extraction 2. Second, there's James Samuel and his 2021 western The Harder They Fall, a first feature which moves with assured confidence, proudly anachronistic, colorful, and bursting with stylistic flourishes designed to luxuriate in the movie's sheer coolness. I have some issues with that style. The film's aesthetic is way too clean and polished for my liking and lacks a lived-in quality, but there's no denying that a directorial vision is at hand, a vision of formal style and political ambition. That vision has also continued to evolve. In 2024, Samuel moved his anachronistic reconstruction of a historically rooted genre from the Western to the biblical epic with The Book of Clarence, a film made for theatrical release and at a major studio. That film flopped, and critical reception was decidedly mixed, as is my own, but it was also a big, ambitious swing from an artist with a lot of ideas, and suggests he's still a talent to keep an eye on. Hargrave is also on the cusp of bigger things. In fact, he's currently in production on Matchbox the Movie. Alright, that's not particularly exciting, but it does show Hargrave being trusted with larger projects, parlaying his Netflix successes to advance his directorial career. It should be noted that Netflix's claims of discovery are still a little dubious. Before working as a director, Sam Hargrave was a stunt coordinator who worked on the MCU, and he was even the second unit director on Avengers: Infinity War and Endgame. Samuel, meanwhile, was already a big name in music, so much so that he was tapped by Baz Luhrmann to be a music consultant on The Great Gatsby way back in 2013. Both guys also have very powerful friends who've produced their directorial efforts. For Hargrave, it's the Russo brothers. For Samuel, it's his good buddy Jay-Z. So, hardly plucked from obscurity, but even with those qualifiers, I do think we can still count both men as directors discovered by Netflix. I'd also count Oz Perkins, whose 2016 film I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House was an early Netflix original. Perkins had directed another feature the year prior, but The Black Coat's Daughter had stalled after its festival premiere, and wouldn't hit theaters or video on demand until 2017, months after Pretty Thing had debuted on Netflix. Though hardly a major release, the film did receive some positive reviews, and more crucially, got the ball rolling for Perkins, who's become a major figure in horror cinema with hits like Longlegs and The Monkey. Now, I don't much like Longlegs, and I flatly hated The Monkey, but the question was about what directors have been discovered by Netflix, not which ones I also like. And sure, there's still some caveats here. Perkins, like Hargrave and Samuel, already had industry connections. The son of legendary actor Anthony Perkins, and a Hollywood actor in his own right. But we shouldn't overestimate these advantages. Anthony Perkins is an icon, but his most famous role was all the way back in 1960, and while his son was also a professional actor, he worked sporadically and largely in small roles. I'm not sure playing uninterested guy in Not Another Teen Movie or his co-leading role in Quigley guaranteed a Netflix contract. He counts. So we have our answer. What directors have been discovered by Netflix? Oz Perkins, James Samuel, Sam Hargrave. 3 names. After a decade of film production and 1,000 original movies. Which is pretty damn paltry. Netflix has become a dominant player, arguably the dominant player in the film industry, and I can count the amount of directors they've discovered on one hand with fingers to spare. And you might be surprised I took this little exercise of identifying directors discovered by Netflix seriously at all, given the connotation of Netflix original movie. While the streamer began its foray into filmmaking with a buzzy drama about child soldiers, complete with a 4-year consideration Oscar campaign, and they do continue to invest in star auteurs, the perception is that Netflix predominantly makes junk. To borrow from Will Tavlin's essay Casual Viewing, the typical Netflix movie is a breezy genre film seemingly algorithmically constructed to fulfill a specific taste cluster, from rom-coms to horror, teen escapism to aging Gen X nostalgia, in Netflix's bid to offer content to every conceivable demographic. The filmmaking is shoddy, with movies often looking cheap even when they cost hundreds of millions of dollars. They resemble commercials more than they do movies, or like the fake movie you'd see characters watching in the background of a real movie. The plots feel haphazardly thrown together, with thin concepts stretched to fill a runtime and the logic of the story undone whenever it's convenient, complete with the usual compendium of genre cliches. The dialogue is inane and inhuman, with characters constantly summarizing the plot.
We spent a day together. I admit, it was a beautiful day, filled with dramatic vistas and romantic rain, but that doesn't give you the right to question my life choices.
Explaining what's happening in a scene.
That was a really good shot, but shoot her in her head!
Like this? I can't. I'm out.
Or reiterating basic narrative information.
I got in.
You got in?
Yes! I got in! We're going to art school in Paris!
Nobody knows where the third egg is.
Your cellmate here knows exactly where the third egg is.
I do not know where the third egg is, I swear to God.
I know what the third egg is.
So when were you gonna tell me about the third egg?
I was never gonna tell you about the third egg.
Tell me where the third egg is.
Shut the fuck up!
Bonus points if there's a voiceover which can just explicitly spell out what's happening.
I know what you're thinking. Noah Flynn is stupid hot.
My love story is ending, but my dad and Trina's is just beginning.
It would be a cold night in hell if I actually won prom queen.
These movies are churned out at a rapid rate. Since 2021, Netflix has released at least one new movie every week, and often a great deal more than just one. Junk food cinema assembled quickly and shoddily to fill programming slots. Why would I ever expect any directors to be discovered in that system? Why indeed? Let's talk about Roger Corman. Roger Corman was a producer who began making B-movies in the 1950s and quickly established a reputation as the king of B-movies. He made films extremely quickly and in rapid succession, specializing in lowbrow genre fare. His audience was less broad than Netflix's. Corman primarily appealed to teenagers, but his genres were diverse, from westerns and science fiction to racing movies and horror flicks, even dabbling in micro-niches like biker movies and women in prison films. Corman was all about identifying audience tastes and satisfying them simply and with minimal pretensions, which meant making junk that satisfied a base urge. Movies that Martin Scorsese described as being almost unencumbered by art.
It's as if these films would be made on your street corner in a way. But they weren't encumbered by having to deal with art, and with a capital A-R-T, and they just weren't, they're art in another way.
Corman's films didn't look cheap. They were cheap. Scripts were written quickly, propped up by cliches and contrivance, with storylines patched together with clunky exposition and explanation.
The Baron did return that night to find Eric with the Baroness, and he did kill her. But there was a struggle, and in the fight, it was not Eric who died, but the Baron. He took the Baron's place, and for 20 years, no one has known. But he took the Baron's place in mind as well as body. In his mind, he is the Baron von Lepp.
Productions moved at a breakneck pace, whole features shot in days, with pennies pinched wherever possible. Sometimes that meant standard cost-saving measures, like reusing costumes and sets across multiple productions, or doubling up on extras on the same film. But other times, Corman was a lot more creative. Like, oh, we have to pay a bunch of travel expenses to move a production to Europe to shoot the real Grand Prix circuits for our racing movie. Might as well write and shoot a whole other movie while we're here to make the most of our travel costs. Oh, Boris Karloff owes us a couple of extra shooting days. Let's shoot new scenes with Karloff, along with some scenes with different actors that can cross over with the Karloff material, and add in some extra footage from Karloff's last movie, and boom, we'll have a whole new movie to sell. This was the system through which Roger Corman provided theaters and drive-ins a rotating supply of B-movie entertainments to be constantly restocked, and he did it for decades. You might not expect that system to be especially conducive to quality cinema, but you'd be wrong. Amidst Corman's schlock quickies are some real gems, movies which did and do provide a jolt of excitement or terror, and demonstrate a cinematic ingenuity that, in at least a couple of cases, resulted in a full-blown classic. And most pertinent for our purposes, this system also produced a killer's row of cinematic talent. The list of directors who got their start working for Roger Corman is simply staggering. So many filmmakers, from the defining artists of the new Hollywood, to populist Hollywood entertainers, to oddball cult directors, began their careers making genre programmers on the cheap for Roger. And it isn't just that Corman discovered a litany of great directors, he also nurtured their talents. Many Corman filmmakers have described the significant influence working for Roger had on their career, and the education they received at the Corman School of Filmmaking, learning not just the technical components of the job, but also how to make movies quickly and cheaply, and how to get the most out of a film with minimal resources. So grateful were Corman's students that many went on to give their old teacher cameos in their bigger and more famous Hollywood films. Do you think, Oz Perkins is gonna put Netflix chairman Reed Hastings in the background of his next movie? Yeah, probably not. So, if junk isn't a disqualifier, what's Netflix's excuse? How is it that a streamer with vast sums of money and industry influence has been thoroughly outdone by the king of the B-movies? There are a couple of answers to this question, and one of which is precisely that level of money and power. Netflix movies may look cheap, but they're anything but. At the highest end, Netflix originals rival and even surpass the costs of major studio productions. But even the cheaper, thrown-together movies still pull name actors and pay for expensive licensed music. And all these films come from the production pipeline of a billion-dollar corporation. With those costs also comes control and restriction, and it's here that Corman's infinitely cheaper productions are at an advantage. Not only did the lack of resources force filmmakers to think creatively and entertain audiences through cinematic ingenuity rather than sheer production value, It also granted a degree of creative freedom. As director Alan Arkish explained,
we knew the genre notes that we had to hit. If we hit those notes, what we put in between those notes was entirely up to us.
Joe Dante wants to add some comedy to his Jaws ripoff. As long as you have the looming terror of aquatic monsters, a corrupt city official ignoring the danger, and swimmers in hysterics as they're ripped apart underwater, go for it. Jonathan Demme wants to add surreal dream scenes to his Women in Prison movie. Are there sexy ladies in skimpy outfits locked behind bars? Knock yourself out. Martin Scorsese's got this Catholic thing. As long as he sticks to the Lovers on the Run crime story, that's fine. Corman provided a looseness which allowed for cinematic expression and risk, even when working within the confines of formulas. It's also important to consider the different contexts of how Corman's films were exhibited versus how Netflix's films are exhibited. From the 50s through to the 70s, Corman was making movies for movie theaters. They may have been grindhouses or drive-in double bills, but they were theaters all the same. And that environment fostered a certain degree of audience engagement. The movie theater requires a baseline investment, that you leave your home specifically for a movie, pay for a ticket, take your seat, and give yourself over to the film. You can't pause or rewind, you can't stop it and pick it up later unless you go out again and pay for another ticket. It is an environment which demands attention. In practice, that attention could of course be fractured, and especially at Roger Corman movies, between friends acting out in their seats or dates making out in their car. But the giant screen still looms above all, outside of viewers' control. It is the center of the audience's focus, and what the filmmakers put up on that screen really matters. The images needed to maintain that attention and entertain consistently enough for an audience to feel their investment of time, effort, and money was worth it. Corman knew this. He might have skimped costs and cut corners. His advertising may have promised a level of sex and mayhem that the movies rarely, if ever, delivered upon. But he also knew that the images on screen had to compel an audience. They had to be worth looking at. That's not to say every Corman production succeeded in this regard. Many did not. Many were in fact pretty bad and even technically inept. But they also existed within a system that, to again borrow from Tavlin, rewarded cinematic expertise and craft. Corman and his filmmakers were incentivized to harness the formal qualities of cinema to entertain the audience, to create images which affected the viewer, to edit those images in set pieces which could elicit excitement or terror. And at the most basic level, theatrical exhibition incentivized visual storytelling. That the plot, characters, and intrigue of a film were pushed forth by the images. Netflix does not offer these incentives. Netflix movies, even the really expensive ones ostensibly looking to compete with studio blockbusters, are made with the assumption that most viewers will be watching at home, where the screen does not demand attention the way a theater's does, and the viewer is surrounded by potential distractions. Not just distractions, it's taken as a given that a lot of Netflix viewers are only half paying attention in the first place. That they've just put on something as background noise while they cook their dinner, or do laundry, or are working from home. A glimmer of entertainment to enliven a mundane task. And even if they aren't doing some chore, there's also the second screen phenomenon, wherein the viewer watching a movie or show is also staring at their phone, browsing Instagram or playing Candy Crush, eyes primarily on the tiny screen in their hands, while vaguely following what's happening on the bigger one against the wall. Cinematic craft and expertise matter a lot less here. It's fine that the shots are ugly, or that the lighting is flat and dull, or that the blocking of the actors is boring, or that everything on the periphery of the frame is out of focus, or that the filmmakers didn't get enough coverage, so instead of cutting to different angles, we just zoom in slightly on the same shot, because the viewer isn't really looking at the movie anyway. This isn't just an environment that disincentivizes cinematic craft, it's actively hostile towards it, and towards visual storytelling more broadly. Telling a story visually that requires paying attention to the screen to follow along what's happening means risking losing that casual viewer. Anyone half watching is likely to get confused or bored or frustrated and stop watching, which as a business is the last thing Netflix wants. The goal is to keep you watching. Not necessarily looking at what you're watching, but to keep Netflix running for as long as possible. Better to provide a frictionless viewing experience. Shoot simplistically, reiterate all relevant plot details in dialogue or through voiceover.
So when were you gonna tell me about the third egg?
There's some debate over how deliberate this filmmaking style is. Some writers have talked about receiving notes from Netflix, encouraging them to make their work more second screen friendly by having characters announce and describe what they're doing. But others have claimed they've never gotten any such notes from the streamer. Ultimately, I can only speak directly to my experience as a viewer. And as a viewer, I watched a lot of Netflix movies while researching this video, and it was maddening. Not merely because a lot of the movies were bad, although a lot of them were, don't get that twisted, but because of how defiantly uncinematic they were. I understood what Tavlin meant when he described the typical Netflix movie as going down best when you're not paying attention. Trying to actually watch some of these films was excruciatingly dull, because I don't think they were made to really be watched. They feel like they were made to be half-watched. Idly browsing your smartphone halfway through Red Notice or Fear Street Prom Queen is not the film failing to engage you. It's an entirely desirable outcome. If the Corman School of Filmmaking fostered and sharpened a director's skills, the Netflix school dulls them. And to that point, I don't think it's just a coincidence that Corman's primary years of directorial discovery were in the 60s and 70s, when the movies were still made for movie theaters. As Corman began producing for the direct-to-video market in the 80s and later direct-to-television, new graduates dried up very quickly. But I don't want to pin everything on just the environment Netflix operates within. Creative movies with a personal vision are made at high budgets and in other billion-dollar systems, and it is absolutely possible to fully lock in and pay attention when watching movies at home. If Netflix wanted to, they could demand more cinematic craft from their filmmakers, and in turn, more investment from the audience, and those standards would be more prone to discovering new directors. But they don't. They choose not to. And with that in mind, I want to talk about a final difference between Netflix and Roger Corman. Corman cared about movies. When Roger Corman started making movies in the 1950s, he wasn't just producing. He was also directing, and he directed a lot. Between 1955 and 1964 alone, Corman directed 42 features. With an output like that, they weren't all winners, but he understood the craft of directing a movie. And if you watch some of his films, especially the Poe adaptations in the 60s, you can see how much he cared. How much work went into crafting the look of his movies. Spooky and atmospheric, but also beautiful, with vibrant color cinematography and involving camera movement. You can see set pieces, like the climax of The Pit and the Pendulum, which are awe-inspiring, transcending their B-movie roots. Or even in something smaller and less ambitious, like the original Little Shop of Horrors, shot in just 3 days, where these scares and laughs are primarily conveyed visually. And you can also see it behind the scenes. For all Corman's reputation as a master of schlock, the man also remortgaged his home in 1962 to produce and direct an anti-segregationist thriller called The Intruder, despite its limited commercial prospects. You don't do that unless you really care about what you're making. The movie is really good too, not just in its still frighteningly prescient portrayal of a rabble-rousing hate-monger stoking racist violence, but also in its craft. Look at the scene of black students walking to an integrated high school for the first time, and how long Corman's camera stays on that long walk to convey the magnitude of the act, or the use of a POV shot to depict the students having to walk through a crowd of racist protesters, conveying the terror of having to face that racism head-on, but also the necessity that the only way out is through. Or look at the ending, where a black student falsely accused of sexual violence is tied to a swing set, swaying back and forth to the grotesque laughter of the white spectators. The imagery is evocative of a lynching, but without needing to resort to such literal extreme violence. In subject matter and execution, The Intruder is indicative of Corman's sense of care as a filmmaker. The heads of Netflix are not filmmakers. Its founders were tech guys who admired Amazon's mail-order business model for books in the 90s and wanted to sell their own products the same way. At the same time, DVDs were first being introduced to US markets, the perfect product for mailing. Netflix began as a DVD rental service which quickly adopted a subscription model, and from mailed discs to streamed video to original film and television production, maintaining and growing that subscriber base has always been the priority. The product is incidental. Movies just happen to be the product best suited to Netflix's subscription model once upon a time. But those times have changed, and TV has taken prominence. Mailing DVDs of a TV show was a lot more cumbersome than of a movie, with single seasons split across multiple discs. Netflix's plans maxed out at 3 discs at a time, meaning it would take multiple rounds of rentals to get through a full season, and that's even if you were dedicating all 3 of those discs to that show. But streaming does away with these physical limitations. Entire seasons, hell, entire series are at viewers' fingertips. They don't even have to get up every couple of episodes to swap discs. They can just sit and binge with ease. Something Netflix has encouraged with its original TV productions dropping entire seasons at once. Indeed, television's model is much better suited to Netflix's goals than movies are. Whether it's bite-sized episodic shows tempting viewers with just one more episode before bed, or serial storytelling placing a trail of cliffhangers to keep viewers hooked, television's format helps foster continual viewing in a way movies don't. Consider how convenient it is when a TV show's credits hit and Netflix is already queuing up the next episode, versus how jarring it is when you finish a movie and before you can even reflect on the experience, the streamer is throwing more stuff in your face to watch.
1 MILF, 20 professional chefs. Who will get away with $100,000?
TV is also better at maintaining existing subscribers. Netflix has made multiple movies I love, but I'm not going to stay subscribed month after month just in case I feel like rewatching The Other Side of the Wind. But the promise of a favorite series returning for more seasons does a lot more to lock subscribers in. And this is something Netflix has pushed even further by licensing shows like Monday Night Raw, which doesn't have an off-season and airs every week indefinitely. If you want to keep up with WWE, you basically have to have Netflix constantly. What's the alternative? I mean, you could watch the vastly superior All Elite Wrestling instead, but I digress. Point is, as Netflix has transformed as a service, movies have become far less essential to their mission. And that inessential quality is especially evident when you step outside of Netflix originals and take a look at the streamer's classic film offerings. The options for classic films currently streaming on Netflix are downright anemic and thin out the further back you go. For 70s films, Netflix Canada is currently offering about a dozen Bollywood movies, Godfather 1 and 2, a German documentary about Hitler, a concert film covering the Push Expo in Chicago, and the Hollywood war epic Midway. Pretty sparse, but at least some of these sound kind of interesting. Roll back to the 1960s, and we've got 3 more Bollywood films, but that's it. And after that, there's nothing. Netflix isn't currently streaming a single movie made before 1962, and this is also true of Netflix in the States. This has been a growing gap in the streamer's catalog for years now. Back in 2017, Zach Schoenfeld wrote about the streamer's appalling classic film options, writing, "You could fill a large film studies textbook with what's not available on Netflix." In 2026, you could fill several. It's unsurprising most online listicles of the best classic movies currently on Netflix are dominated by films from the 80s and 90s. As far as Netflix is concerned, that's basically when film history starts. And it wasn't always this bad. I distinctly remember being an undergrad and watching all sorts of old movies on Netflix, mostly classic Hollywood staples, but even some international art house triumphs. Even as late as 2019, Netflix still streamed things like Kino's Pioneers, First Women Filmmakers, a collection of early silent movies directed by women, and I'm talking very early silent films. It's almost comical in Schoenfeld's article when he complains that Netflix only has 43 films from before 1970 and less than 25 made before 1950. In 2026, those numbers look downright indulgent. The idea that you might come across an old black and white movie, or, God forbid, a silent picture on Netflix, is now pure fantasy. So what accounts for this classic film decline? A common theory is that it's related to Netflix's push into original production. Making so much original content is expensive, which means less money to go around for licensing old media. And that doesn't just affect classic movies. There's certainly more movies streaming from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s than there are prior decades, but it's still a really thin pool. Compare the near 200 movies from the 2000s currently streaming on Netflix to the 1,300 from the 2010s, or the near 3,000 from the 2020s. Yes, Netflix currently offers more movies from just the last 6 years than they do from the entire history of cinema up to that point. I also suspect classic movies on average drew less viewers for Netflix than more contemporary films or nostalgic blockbusters. They are a harder sell to the uninitiated, especially when Netflix doesn't curate its titles and lets its algorithm do all the heavy lifting. Remember, Netflix wants frictionless viewing, and old movies create friction. They're made at a time when home viewing isn't even a possibility, let alone a consideration. Many lack color. The pacing is different than a contemporary audience is used to. The performances are more exaggerated. The special effects have aged, as have the standards of realism. None of these are actually problems, of course, but they do often require some adjustments from new viewers, and Netflix is not interested in fostering those adjustments. And as for the film buffs who already love classic movies and wouldn't need to make any adjustments, they know how paltry Netflix's classic film library is, so they get their classic film fix elsewhere, be it TCM or other streaming services, or even just their local library. Fundamentally, Netflix are not incentivized to license classic movies, just as they're not incentivized to invest in unproven talent or to cultivate a filmmaking culture of cinematic craft and visual storytelling. And at the center of these shortcomings is a simple truth. Despite producing over 1,000 films, despite becoming a dominant player in the film industry, so much so as to very nearly acquire legacy movie studio Warner Brothers and their vast film library, Netflix isn't really in the movie business. Tavlin argues that Netflix is first and foremost a television company, citing how the streamer's most popular TV shows vastly outnumber their most popular films. This has in fact been the case from the start of Netflix's original productions. Beasts of No Nation was fairly well reviewed back in 2015, but its success was thoroughly outdone by the streamer's first original TV show, House of Cards, which has faded in relevance since 2013, but for a time was immensely popular. And as I've laid out here, the structure and format of television are much better suited to Netflix's streaming model than movies are. But I ultimately don't think it's fully accurate to say Netflix is a TV company either. Rather, to use the streamer's own words, Netflix is a content company. That was true in the 1990s when Netflix was looking for some kind of content they could sell through the mail. It was true in the 2010s when they started producing their own content. And it's true now, as that content includes movies, TV shows, even podcasts. Whatever can be put on a screen to keep viewers watching and their precious subscriptions active. Why can't Netflix discover new directors? Because they aren't in the movie business. And they don't care.